you know, Paul Bunyan is from the Great Northwest. Pecos Bill is from the Southwest.
Texas.
Johnny Appleseed, Midwest. John Chapman from Ohio. John Henry is from the Great South. Where's the tall tale character from the Northeast? You know, and as a kid, I was really troubled by this. You know, this was disturbing to me. And so when Mrs. Flood, our second grade substitute teacher, told us, Mrs. Flood, she introduced herself. My name is Mrs. Flood. When I walk down the street, where's that water when I need it?
Speaking of floods.
When I walk down the street with all my children walking behind me, the neighbors say, there goes Mrs. Flood with all her little puddles. Now, students, I tell you that story so that you'll remember my name, Mrs. Flood. And more than 50 years later, I remember Mrs. Flood's name. So she told this story about Bill Greenfield, and she said Bill Greenfield was from upstate New York. And this, she had my attention. I mean, so here's the story she told. Bill decided that he was going to spend a whole year long up in the Adirondacks all by himself just to prove that it could be done. Now, that's no big challenge, spring, summer, fall, but the winter, of course, is the big challenge. Well, he started right off in the spring to get a good start, planted a garden, which attracted a lot of rabbits and deer, so he had plenty to eat, mostly rabbits and deer. But by the time winter came early that year, you know, September. And he had pretty much all he needed stored away. And boy, did it snow that year. You know, he had to tunnel his way out the front door, and there was no point to it because all he got was more snow. You know, look up at the snow roof. So he gave up on leaving the place, and he just stayed there himself, which was not a bad idea because it was so cold. You know how the Adirondacks get to be really cold, and probably everybody knows that it's so cold when you talk, the words just freeze in the air. So there's a real danger in the spring of hearing loss because people tend to talk louder so that the words go a little bit further before they freeze. And if they end up really shouting to try and be heard, then the words freeze. And in the spring, when it all soars at once, the noise is so much you can go deaf. So it's just as well you don't talk at all. Well, come April, there were still a few more weeks of winter to go, and he was out of food. So he had to go out, do a little hunting. And there was a stream close by, which was still running. It hadn't frozen over because the water went so fast it never had time to freeze. He was afraid to dip anything into it because he figured it'd just freeze right up immediately. Anyway, he got out down the long rifle from on top of the mantelpiece. He rummaged around, only found one piece of lead shot, which was really all he needed. He took after his father, Abner, just an excellent marksman, excellent hunter. Probably not as good as Abner, but anyway, he put the gunpowder in, he put the shot in, and went outside. And before long, you know, of course, it's so cold, he had to put on every stitch of clothing available in the cabin, including the waders, because he just needed that insulation. It was so cold. And he heads out, and before long, he spots a deer. And he's about ready to take aim, and then he sees there's another deer over there. And right in the middle, he sees this outcropping, you know, where the stone underneath the ground, it's not much soil in the Adirondacks, it sticks right out, and there's a sharp edge to that outcropping. So he aims right for that sharp edge, shoots, the shot comes out, splits, and kills both deer. Well, that was great, but the kickback from that rifle was so strong it sent Bill on his back. He falls into the stream instantly. That water freezes inside his waders, and he lets out such a scream it goes up into the sky before it freezes right around a goose that happened to be flying by at that instant. The goose drops like a stone to the ground. Bill lurches himself out of the stream, grabs that goose, brings it into the cabin to have for dinner. It wasn't until then, in the heat of the stove cooking, that the ice and his waders melted, and that's when he became aware that he'd captured 2 brown trout and a mallard duck. And that was the first introduction I had to Bill Greenfield, the gall darndest liar.